Hello, welcome back to our latest You Are My Boro with myself, Dom Shaw, and Scott Wilson, both of the Northern Echo. And my next door neighbour has just started mowing the lawn there, just as
perfect.
Good timing. And talking of timing,
is he on gardening leave?
Talking of timing, it's Wednesday afternoon, and Middlesbrough have parted ways with Michael Carrick in what has turned into a manic day for us, Scott, because you were meant to be off work today, but I've ended up working the vast majority of the day. I've got the small matter of flying off on my stag do tomorrow morning for 4 days. So there was a time today when we considered doing a You Are My Boro from live poolside from me tomorrow. What, 4, 5, 6 pints?
That might work, It might work.
We crack on. But anyway,
yes,
Scott's got to dip off in 10 minutes or so. So we're gonna have a chat now. And when Scott's got to dip off, I'll just chunt it to myself for 10 minutes. And then obviously we'll be back very early next week with a more thorough analysis of what happens next, I think. So let's start, Scott, with today's decision. Michael Carrick has gone. He's been sacked by Boro. Jonathan Woodgate and Graham Carrick have gone with him. We're not sure at this stage what that means for Grant Ledbetter and Alan Fettis. There's no word on their announcement yet. Boro have said that there'll be no that there's nothing else coming imminently. The search for a new head coach starts now, but let's talk Carrick first. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the news?
Well, if this had happened the day after they lost at Coventry on the last day of the season, I don't think anyone would have been particularly surprised. It felt like the end of the road had come. Now, obviously, we then got guidance from within the club that there was going to be this review. They were going to look at absolutely everything. It wasn't a case of just picking an easy scapegoat. And the longer that went on, the more I think all of us, fans, media, everyone, probably felt, well, the likelihood of him staying feels like it's been increasing. Now, actually, I think reading between the lines and from different bits that we picked up, Dom, what I think has happened is they've had a series of internal meetings. Obviously, Carrick's future's been a massive part of that. There's then been further discussions amongst the hierarchy at Boro. Carrick, I think, has gone away for a few days while all that's been going on. Hence, there's been this kind of delay. I think Steve Gibson, being Steve Gibson, will have absolutely wanted, if he was going to do this, to do it man-to-man to Carrick. And so that's kind of got us to the situation where there's been this delay, but now that everybody's back together and there's been the opportunity for everyone to meet together at Rockcliffe, this has happened. So not a surprise off the back of last season and not a surprise in terms of all the kind of feelings that we felt there's been within, Michael Carrick's time at Boro, everything that didn't work last season, but probably a little bit of a surprise given how long it's taken to get to this point, if that makes any kind of sense.
Is it the right decision?
I think it is. I think, listen, we do these podcasts. We go and see Michael Carrick on a weekly basis when the season's on and stuff like that. So we can give our views, we can give our opinions. But we also have to have a working relationship with these people. So I guess it's hard for us. People will say, well, why didn't you just come out and say Michael Carrick should be sacked? I think we pretty much did as much as we can as working journalists who have to have a functioning relationship with Michael Carrick. Do you know what I mean? I think we spelled out on a number of occasions why we felt that it wasn't working. Not good enough at changing things in game. Tactically inflexible. Just the general demeanor and the way that he led the group was starting to grate, certainly on fans. And I don't think it was the right way to energize a club that was going to be in need of a massive lift after what had happened at the end of last season. I think if we got into next season with Michael Carrick still as head coach, then there would have been a real flatness, a real apathy, a real sense of, well, how is this going to get any better? And Michael Carrick might have overseen improvements next season because there have been periods in Carrick's reign when it has worked and when it has looked good. But if it hadn't worked from the word go next season and Carrick had still been in charge, I think very quickly we would have seen that just the general unhappiness that was apparent in the second half of last season be there from the word go. And that's not healthy for everyone, is it? I think it needed a freshen up. It needed a new start. So I do think it's the right thing, yeah.
And I'll have a chunt to myself in 5-10 minutes or so about what might happen next. But I completely understand the frustration of fans who wanted to hear from the club in the last few weeks. But we are still very, very early in the summer, aren't we? Boro have time on their side now as they set about the process of finding a new head coach. It kind of feels slightly, because of the transfer window opening early, which is purely for the Club World Cup clubs. There's been kind of this, not panic, but a feeling that Boro should be making signings, or signings should come in. But it is still remarkably early in the summer. Boro still have weeks on the side now before the players even return to start pre-season.
Yeah, and I think what this does at least show, and I think you've got to give the Boro hierarchy some credit for this, is the longer this went on with the silence, the more the inevitable perception, we've seen it right across social media, we've seen it on some of the comments underneath these vids, well, this is just a whitewash. This is just a way of kicking the can down the road. It's going to amount to absolutely nothing. They're going to keep Carrick in charge. Yes, they might tweak a coach here and there, or they might make changes with the but fundamentally, nothing's going to change. Well, you know what? You've got to give Boro the credit that when they said we want a review and we are going to look forensically at this and we will make decisions off the back of this, well, they have done that. Now, they've now got to get a lot of things right. Clearly, the appointment of the new head coach being absolutely forefront as number one. But at the very least, what this hasn't been is just a whitewash and let's just kick this can down the road. At least that hasn't happened.
And Carrick's future. Can
you'll come back somewhere. You've written a piece just kind of, a bit of an inside track on what went wrong and all of that. I'd absolutely recommend everyone gets on the Northern Echo website and reads that. And within that, you point out quite rightly that even in the last 12 months, it's felt like there's been a real jarring between what we're seeing at Boro and what most, I think, Boro fans have been feeling to the national perception of Michael Carrick as a Tottenham or a West Ham manager in waiting. I still think that there's a sense nationally that Michael Carrick, all right, he didn't get Boro promoted, but let's be honest, Aitor Karanka is the only person who got Boro promoted there and came straight back down. Boro is not really a club that get promoted. So, he's got them in the playoffs. He got them near the playoffs the season that he didn't. I think nationally, the perception is Michael Carrick did an okay job. So I don't think that Carrick will struggle to get work. At what level and quite where will be interesting to see. Now, the interesting thing will be, can he be a success? Well, I think that'll depend on how much is he willing to take on board and learn from what has gone wrong. Because one of the probably criticisms of Carrick in the 3 years he's been at Boro is that he's been far too stubborn, far too wedded to one way of doing things, far too inflexible. Well, if he goes into another job and that stays exactly the same, then I would imagine there's every chance that the same issues and the same problems will start cropping up. If he's willing to be a bit more adaptable, we've seen in that first season that he can develop players. We've seen that he can spot a player and spot potential in a player and work with them. We've seen that he can put a team together that plays exciting, vibrant football. What we haven't seen from him yet is when things start going wrong, can he turn it around? Well, I think, that's going to be the acid test, isn't it? It wouldn't surprise me at all if he went into a new job and the first 6 months were sweetness and light and he hits the ground running and everything's great because he had that reaction at Boro. It's where does he, how does he start turning things around? How does he change things that aren't working? How does he adapt his management style, his preferred tactical setup, all of that? That's what I think he's got to hone and develop.
Right, you've got to wrap up. You've got to get off. Scott.
I've got to go and pick up my daughter and have a meeting about her French trip because I am meant to be on a day off. So I apologise for having to duck out and do this, but I am going to go.
A meeting about a French trip sounds expensive.
Yes. That's part of what the meeting's about.
Don't say au revoir. Don't say au revoir before it
Au revoir!
Cheers, Scott. Thanks very much. Right, I'm going to chunt it to myself for 10 minutes or so. Before we wrap up here. And yeah, the thing that Scott mentioned there about the outside perception is interesting because only this week Joe Cole was mentioning Carrick as a potential successor for Ange Postecoglou at Tottenham if he gets the sack this summer. And one national newspaper this morning talked about how Carrick had led Boro's revival against the odds after the sacking came out, which I just don't think tallies really with the feeling on Teesside. Now, that's not to say that Carrick hasn't done good stuff at Boro. The good I wrote in the piece that Scott referenced there, I think the good has been very good during his time in charge. The first season, for a stage in that first season, Boro were as good as any team in the division, absolutely no doubt about that. I think when Boro won at Sheffield United that night, I felt Boro were going to go on and win automatic promotion. And I think Boro's players and Michael Carrick, I know they couldn't say it, but I think at that stage they felt that they were going to go on and win automatic promotion. And you looked at that then and thought that Boro were not only well placed to go up, but without getting ahead of myself, to stay up. And I know that's said with the background of successive seasons now, where the three clubs have gone up, have come back down. But Chuba Akpom would have obviously stayed. Cameron Archer would have probably signed. Ryan Giles would have signed. Zach Steffen would have signed. Aaron Ramsey would have signed. Now, I know all of those players have struggled since. None of them have kicked on, but they were in a system and a place, and there was a model that worked for them there. It didn't go to plan. Boro, that obviously led to a major summer overhaul. That summer, those players going, and the slow start of the following season. The next season, I felt Carrick's first full season in charge was about par, really. That's probably been slightly harsh, maybe slightly above par. A Carabao Cup semi-final, the home win over Chelsea, which was one of the great Riverside nights. But I got a response on Bluesky earlier, and I'll just read it to you because I thought it summed it up. This is from Guy Bailey. I think the Chelsea matches are the perfect prism to judge the Carrick project. First leg was everything good about it, aggressive, free-flowing football and goals. The second was everything bad, comical defending, tactical inflexibility, inability to change a game in progress, and embarrassing results. Now, clearly losing to Chelsea away isn't embarrassing, but the point stands with some of the games and the manner of some of defeats, I think. And then a response to that, see also Sheffield Wednesday on Boxing Day away to Bristol City, both a literal game of two halves. And I think that's fair. And that was the frustration, I think, of this season, that two teams went up with 100 points. So it's harsh to judge Boro against those two teams. But they finished closer in points to the bottom of the table, Cardiff City, than they did Sheffield United in third. They failed to get in the top six when it was the lowest points tally since, 2012 to finish sixth. We saw what happened to Bristol City in the playoffs. We saw how bang average the likes of Blackburn were. West Brom sacked a manager and lost a manager. Millwall, with respect, I don't think their squad could rival Boro's. So there's no doubt that 10th place finish was a major disappointment. But as Scott alluded to, I think what was probably just as worrying was not just where Boro finished, not just the manner of that, but the apathy in the stands towards the end of the season, the Sheffield Wednesday and Norwich performances that were hard to stomach. And a mate of mine said to me earlier in the summer, home and away, goes home and away, season ticket holder, and he said if Carrick was to stay and Boro were to say draw, get Watford at home on the first day of the season and draw 0-0, and the feel of the game was similar to what we saw at the back end of last season, ponderous and predictable in attack, inability to break teams down. There's every chance, I know this is a hypothetical scenario, there's every chance Boro would have been booed off, and that's not a healthy way to start any season, obviously. So who's it going to be next? That's obviously the question that fans are asking, and I think the obvious names are going to be thrown into the mix in the next couple of days. This is still very early. We're just still a matter of hours after Carrick's been sacked, so clearly it's too early to know at this stage who might come in. But the candidates and names that we're likely to see: Rob Edwards. We know he's been interviewed by Boro in the past. He's been of interest to Boro in the past. He's without a job since leaving Luton at the end of last season. So he'll be a candidate, you would think. Gary O'Neill without a job after his Wolves exit last year. Now, I know with O'Neill, there's kind of the baggage or the complication of what was said and what was done after his playing career. But there's no getting away from the fact he's done a good job in management so far. Let's see how that one plays out. Danny Roll's an interesting one. He's still at Sheffield Wednesday. Now, obviously, the complicating factor there with Roll is the fact that there is a large compensation figure. 4 or 5 million is the suggested compensation figure. Sheffield Wednesday are in a sorry state, aren't they? I don't think there's any getting away from the fact that Roll would like to get out of Sheffield Wednesday, but how realistic is it that Boro are going to pay that compensation fee? Nobody has so far. It's a staggeringly high compensation figure for a manager. Let's see how that one plays out. Steve Cooper, He's gone in as the bookies' favourite, again, without a club after leaving Nottingham Forest. And I was only seeing a bit of reaction on social media earlier because Cooper seems to be quite divisive, and I'm not really sure why. Brilliant job at Nottingham Forest. He was, I know they've kicked on since, but he kept Forest up in his first year in charge, done a fine job there. Sorry, I've said he's been out without a club since Forest. Obviously, he was at Leicester at the start of the season. And I think he was probably a victim of his Forest association when he went in at Leicester. But look how that appointment backfired, really. Now, I'm not going to say that Leicester would have stayed up had Cooper stayed on, but they got worse after Cooper's exit. There's no doubt about that. Will there be a curveball? Michael Carrick was a curveball. I'm sure after Chris Wilder's exit, Michael Carrick wouldn't have been one of the first names we were talking about. And Steve McLaren, Brian Robson, Aitor Karanka, really, they were all curveball appointments at the time. So will there be a curveball appointment? We'll see. Again, this is likely to play out in the coming days. But as we were touched on there, really, with the timing, there's no real rush for Boro. Clearly, they don't want this to drag on weeks and weeks and weeks. But Boro still have a few weeks before the players are due back for the start of pre-season. That gives them time to carry out interviews, to assess their options moving forward, and then you're still going to get someone in with the bulk of with all of pre-season, with the bulk of the summer transfer window. And just finally on transfers as well, I think it's worth pointing out that, and we reported this over the weekend, Boro had transfer targets in place. They have the top targets in place, and that doesn't really change regardless of who the manager is. We had a few fans asking, well, how's that the case if a manager's going, that the same targets will be in place without the next manager coming in? But that's the model that Boro operate in now. That is why, unlike previous appointments, Boro won't be ripping it up and starting again. The next manager who comes in is going to be deemed a good fit. He's going to fit the squad. He's going to fit the model. He's going to fit the structure. So there should, in essence, be continuity. And the next manager coming in should fit the targets that Boro have identified. 5 leading targets: right back, centre midfield, right wing, and up front. And Boro will obviously look to address other areas in the squad as well. But that's the priority. But the priority in the coming weeks is going to be the appointment of a new head coach now. So let's see how that plays out. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll be back early next week with another You Are My Boro, by which point we'll have had time to truly assess today's news and the days that follow, and we'll get a better idea of what's going to come moving forward. Do get in touch if there's anything you want us to discuss, anything specific you want us to discuss on the and pods and vids in the weeks to come. It promises to be an interesting few weeks ahead. Thanks for watching. Take care.